Hi there! It's good to see you again. Do you still remember Henry and Anton from our previous video entitled Introduction to Obligations? Well, Henry asked us today, what are the instances where I can incur obligations? There are sources of obligations which include law, contracts, quasi-contracts, crimes or delicts, and quasi-delicts. Henry and Anton entered into a sales transaction. Anton sold his parcel of land to Henry for an amount of 1 million pesos. The written agreement executed between Henry and Anton is called a contract. Contract is a meeting of minds between two persons, wherein one binds himself with respect to the other to give something or to render some service. The written agreement binds Henry and Anton. It is a source of obligations which both parties need to comply with. How about the payment of taxes in relation to the sales transaction? What is the source of this obligation? Well, Henry, it is the law. Law is the rule of conduct, just and obligatory, prescribed by a legitimate or controlling authority for common observance and benefit. The National Internal Revenue Code is a law that mandates the payment of certain taxes in relation to the sale of properties. Continuing our discussion, another source of obligations is quasi-contracts. Quasi-contracts are certain lawful, voluntary, and unilateral acts giving rise to a juridical relation to the end that no one shall be unjustly enriched at the expense of another. Let's take this situation. Henry had an urgent business abroad. He left his piggery unattended. His friendly neighbor, Anton, noticed that there was no one in charge of taking care of the pigs. Out of concern, he bought food supplies, fed the pigs, and cleaned the pigsty. Does Henry have the obligation to reimburse Anton for the expenses? Yes. The source of obligation is quasi-contracts. The situation I have just mentioned is that of negotiorum gestio. In negotiorum gestio, a person voluntarily administers the properties or affairs of another without his consent. Thus, the person receiving the benefit has the obligation to reimburse the related expenses. Another kind of quasi-contract is solutio in debiti. In the situation, Henry owed Anton an amount of 100,000 pesos, but Henry paid a total of 150,000 pesos by believing that he owes such amount. There was a payment by mistake. Anton has the obligation to return the 50,000 to Henry. What if, instead of administering the properties of Henry, Anton stole the pig farming equipment of Henry? Anton has the obligation to return the equipment or to indemnify Henry of the damages incurred because the acts of Anton is a crime or a delict which is punishable by law. What if, when Anton was stealing the pig farming equipment, a part of the equipment fell, hitting a passerby in the head? Does Anton have the obligation to pay the expenses for the medication of the passerby? Yes, the obligation is from quasi-delicts, which are acts or omissions that cause damage to another, there being no contractual relationship between the parties. Now that you are very familiar with the sources of obligation, here's a question for you. Mr. Mackey rides a bus in going to work. While the bus is traversing an intersection, it hits a delivery truck driven by Mr. Clark, resulting to the head injury of Mr. Mackey. He was immediately rushed to the hospital. So the question is, what are the sources of obligation? In our next video, we will be discussing the nature and effects of obligations.